Hello, and welcome to Tim's Reflections from Ohio, a YouTube video series where we've been talking about and reflecting on parables and stories that Jesus told, as well as just general stories from the entire Bible. And last week in our reflection, we talked about Joseph. And we talked about how he was the favored son of his father, and he had several brothers, and that several of them became jealous of him because their father favored Joseph. And they ended up, their jealousy led them to sell him into slavery. And then they had to make up a story as to what happened to him. They told their father, they brought Jacob, the father, had made Joseph this coat of many colors, this beautiful coat. And they took that coat and they dipped it in some animal blood, and they brought it to their father, and they said, "Look, Dad, we found this. We think this is Joseph's coat, and something must have happened to him." And Jacob, for all these years, had thought his son was dead. And so we followed Joseph as he was taken to Egypt. He was bought by a leader in the Egyptian government named Potiphar. And Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his whole household, and he realized that he saw that God was blessing Joseph. And so he put everything under Joseph's control except for Potiphar's wife. And apparently Joseph was a nice looking young man, and Potiphar's wife had eyes for him, and she had tried to entice him, to encourage him, to lure him into bed with her. But Joseph was strong, and he said, "How can I do this great sin against God?" He knew that sin is ultimately against God, and he refused. And because of that, she took offense to that, and she told her husband that Joseph had been the aggressor. He had tried to press her to go into bed with him. And Potiphar took Joseph and put him in prison. And while he was in prison, a couple of his fellow prisoners had dreams, and they were troubled by these dreams, and Joseph was able to interpret them for those dreams for those two men. And it turned out exactly as Joseph said it would. So one of them ended up back working for Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the king of Egypt. And one of these men that had been a prisoner ended up working for Pharaoh. And one night Pharaoh had a dream, and he was troubled by it. No one could tell him what the dream meant. And this man remembered, hey, there was this guy in prison who interpreted some dreams for a couple of us, and they were spot on. It turned out exactly the way he said it would. I think this man can interpret your dream. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph. Joseph came and told him the interpretation of the dream. And the interpretation was that there was going to be 7 years of plenty. They would have plenty of grain in the fields. They would have plenty of produce. Everything would be doing well in those 7 years, but it would be followed by 7 years of famine. And what they needed to do was to prepare for those 7 years of famine. So Pharaoh appointed Joseph to be the leader, to prepare. Joseph built big storage areas to store this excess produce and this excess grain in, so there would be food to feed the people for these 7 years of famine. Joseph actually became second in command in Egypt, right under Pharaoh. And he had this powerful position, but he always maintained his humble spirit and his allegiance to God, even though he was working in an ungodly environment. And there's a example for us. Many of us are working in ungodly environments, and we have to hear people every day talking about, things that are their life and how horrible things are, and they're using, profanity and all this stuff, and we're around that. But Joseph was able, working in that environment, living in that environment, he was able to maintain his allegiance to God as an example to us. We can look at it and say, Joseph did that. It's possible to do that. And we can do that too if we are faithful to God. Well, moving on with Joseph. Once the 7 years of plenty ended and the famine began, people from the surrounding area were coming to buy food in Egypt. And one day Jacob told his sons, we're running out of food here. Go over to Egypt and buy some food for us. So they went over there, and when they were there, they came face to face with Joseph. They did not recognize Joseph, but he recognized his brothers. And he thought, I wonder if they've changed. Are they still the same men that they were when they sold me into slavery? So he set up a series of tests to test them and to see what was, if their hearts were really still as hard as they were at that time. And so it came down to, we're going to read in Genesis chapter 45. This will be our reflection for today, or at least part of it. Genesis chapter 45, and we'll begin reading in verse 1. It says, Then Joseph could not restrain himself before those who stood by him, and he cried out, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. So he's finally going to tell them who he is. He wanted everybody else out of the room except for him and his brothers. And it says, And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. The people that, his co-worker, the people that were working there, the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh, they heard him crying. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. They were scared. They were scared that, okay, now he's a powerful man. He's going to get revenge on us. They were afraid. And Joseph said to his brothers, Please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. So Joseph was finding something good in this bad situation that God had led him. God was in charge of this. Verse 6, For those 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Then he sent them back to his father, to their father. He said, Go back and tell my father that I'm alive, and bring him and your families and everyone, and bring them down, and we'll give you some land here, and you can live here in Egypt. And so they did that. But think about these brothers. They now had to go back to their father and tell him what had truly happened all those years ago. That they had been living this lie for all those years, and now they have to tell their father the truth. And let's jump over now to chapter 50 of Genesis. And they've reached a point where Jacob has died. And starting in verse 15, we read, it says, When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, Before your father died, he commanded, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face and said, Behold, we are your servants. And Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for me, the evil you meant against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. So Joseph, again, he found something good, positive in this bad situation. And so many of us are living lives today. We've been hurt by our family members. We've been hurt by our friends, our co-workers, our neighbors. And it's up to us what we're going to do with that hurt. Are we going to hold on to it? Are we going to let it eat us alive inside? Or are we going to let it go and ask God to help us to deal with it? Forgive those people that have hurt us. Jesus on that cross He had been crucified. He had a crown of thorns on his head. The blood was running down his face. Both hands and his feet had nails through them. He was bleeding and suffering and struggling, but yet he prayed, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. He asked God to forgive them. Instead of holding a grudge, he asked them to forgive him. Ask God to forgive them. And we need to do the same thing, to not hold grudges against other people, but to let it go and forgive. And sometimes, and I don't want to make light of what some people have been through. Some people have been through horrible situations, horrible abuse, horrible mistreatment. But holding on to that bitterness just eats us away, eats us up inside. We need to forgive, and sometimes it takes a miracle, and God is still, we read in the Bible of all the miracles that happened in Bible times. Miracles are still happening today. People's lives are still being changed today, and God will help us if we come to him and we say, God, I've got to get rid of this bitterness. I've got to get rid of this anger. I've got to get rid of this desire for revenge. We come to him and we're honest with him. He will help us. He will direct us. He will guide us. Personal story I want to share with you happened many years ago when I was in high school. I attended a Christian boarding high school, and this story happened my junior year. And at that time, at that age, young men are starting to grow some facial hair, and it helped me feel grown up. Felt like I was becoming a man. And I had a full beard at the time, and an announcement was made before we went home for Thanksgiving break that when we came back, all young men were supposed to be clean shaven. Well, I didn't take that real seriously. I had a rebellious streak in me. And so when I came back, I had shaved some, but not all of the facial hair. And I was sitting in my class that Monday morning, my first class Monday morning after Thanksgiving break, and a faculty member tapped me on the shoulder and motioned for me to step out of the room. I did. And he told me that I was expelled from school until I would shave. I went back to the dormitory, and I had been talking with some of my fellow students, some of my friends. I wasn't the only one who hadn't shaved. And they said, we're not shaving. We're not going to go along with this new rule. And so I struggled with that, and I called home. My dad was not home. I talked to my mom and told her what had happened. She called the school, talked to the principal. He assured her that everyone was going to shave because that was my concern. I'm going, if I shave, they're not going to shave, and that's not right. So I struggled with that. But anyway, he assured her everyone would shave. She called me back, said, I've talked to the principal. He assured me that everyone will shave. So I shaved. Next day, I was back in class. Everything's fine. But I shaved and not everyone else did. So a couple days later, the principal called us that had been involved in this situation of not shaving to his office. And he said, you guys can go ahead and grow your facial hair back. What had happened was the parents of some of the other students had threatened to sue the school if their son had to shave. And the principal had talked to the school's attorneys, and they had said that if this went to court, there was a 50-50 chance of winning, which meant there's a 50-50 chance of losing. And he decided not to press the issue. We can all grow our facial hair back. But at that point, the root of bitterness was deep in my heart. And I thought I couldn't get past what I felt like, some of us had been mistreated, me included. Other people didn't have to shave. And it was so bad that if I were walking down one of the sidewalks on campus and the principal was coming the other direction toward me, I would just go off a different direction. I did not want to see that man. I did not want to pass him. I did not want to speak to him. I was angry, bitter, and I just wanted to avoid the man. Well, in March of the following year, I was home for spring break, and I had a problem and a medical problem, and I had to have surgery. I had to miss the rest of the end of the school year from March through the end of the school year. I was able to do my, keep up with my lessons at home, and, everything was taken care of, and I moved on to my senior year the next year. Well, at the end of that school year, the principal moved on to another school, being principal of another high school in another state. I mean, he moved multiple states away, and he was out of sight, out of mind. I totally forgot about the man. And one day, I went into the cafeteria one morning, my senior year. I went in for breakfast, and there he was. He was back on campus. And all that bitterness and that anger and all of those feelings came back, flooding back to the surface in my thoughts. And I thought, I can't deal with this. I need help. So I went to the Bible teacher, and I told him, I said, I need some help. I need to talk to you. He came to my dormitory room. We sat down. I spilled the whole story out to him. And he told me something I didn't know. He said, last year when you had your surgery, your medical issue, and you couldn't return, the principal had told my teachers to do everything they could to make sure that I could complete my lessons and pass to the next grade the next year. Well, that meant something to me. And this Bible teacher guided me through the forgiving process. And finally, after all of that time of, months and months, probably close to a year, maybe a year at that point, this had been going on, and I was finally able to forgive and let it go. And I really believe that today, if that principal that I was so angry at, he's passed away. He's no longer alive. But I really believe that if I were to see him today, I could shake his hand and smile and talk to him and be respectful, because I finally was able to forgive. And I know that may seem like a small thing compared to what you or other people are dealing with. But at the same time, the principle is there, the forgiveness, the bitterness, the anger, whatever those feelings are, they're there, and only God can help us. This is not something we can do on our own and manufacture. Oh yeah, I'm going to forgive. We need God's help. We need to come to him, and we need to say, God, this is eating me up. This is killing me. I can't deal with it. I can't get rid of it. I can't get past it. I need your help. And God will help us. God has helped people forgive horrible things that have happened to them, and to get past them so that they can let it go and they can live a life of peace and contentment. He's there. He's just waiting for us to bring those things to him. So in closing today, I ask you to think about your life. And maybe as we're talking, some things have came to your mind, thinking, yeah, I need to forgive that. I need to forgive that. Whatever it is. If that's the case, take it to God. Don't try to do it on your own, but take it to God and say, it's too big for me. I can't handle it. I can't deal with it. I need your help. He is still, as I said earlier, he's still working miracles today. He's still there for us. He's still there to help us. He will not turn his back on us. He wants the best for his children. Remember that. Let it go with his help, and live that life that he wants you to live, a life of peace and joy and contentment and all of the good things he has for us. That's it for the reflection today. If you've been blessed, please hit that thumbs up button, leave a comment. As always, I enjoy reading those comments. And remember, as always, remember the fact that God loves you. He loves you so much that he sent his son to die all those years ago on that cross for you, for me, so that we would have an opportunity to spend eternity in heaven with you. Don't let that go. Don't miss out on heaven just because of something that happened to you that you can't get past. When God is there, he's there for you. He's there waiting for you to bring it to him and say, it's too big for me. A little child doesn't have a problem coming to mom or dad or grandpa or whatever. I have 2 little grandchildren, and they come to me. They need help with something. They don't have a problem doing that. I can't open this, I can't get this to work, whatever it is. But God is our Father. And sometimes we're stubborn, we're proud, we need to get past that so that we feel free to go to him, just like those children come to mom or dad or grandpa or grandma, say, I need some help. We need to go to God and say, I need some help too. That's it for the reflection. Have a blessed day. Thank you so much.